Abraham Lincoln once apparently said, "If you give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Well, after today it shouldn't take you 4 hours. Hello and welcome to English Country Life on a grey and windy rainy day. You're welcome to the workshop, and I'm sorry in advance if the wind and rain causes any creaks and groans. And welcome to the next episode in our series on restoring vintage axe. In part 1 we looked at how to choose an axe for restoration and how to clean up any damage. In part 2 we looked at how to remove rust from a vintage axe head. In part 3 we looked at what's the proper axe geometry for doing various tasks and how should I profile and sharpen my axe to get it to the shape that it needs to be efficient at the tasks it has to undertake. Today we're going to look at the techniques for actually sharpening up our axe. Let's talk briefly on the mystique of sharpening. I'm concerned that a lot of people try and make sharpening harder than it has to be. Sharpening is a very simple process. All it means is when you're sharpening a metal object, you're taking something with a flattened out edge, you're removing material and making a sharp edge, and you need something to abrade that material away to do it. There's no mystique to it, it's not complicated, and there are many ways of doing it, all of which work. Some are quicker, some are slower, some risk messing it up if you do it wrong, but ultimately they're just ways of abrading metal and getting a shape. In the last video we discussed the shape you want. Let's take a look now at some of the tools we could use just to remove material to get it to the shape and the angles we need for it to be sharp. Here are some simple hand tools that you can use to sharpen an axe. We won't use them all, don't worry, but they break into about 4 components. Files, diamond abrasive, stones, and sandpaper. And let's look at each of them and discuss what they may or may not be good for. You can of course use power tools, but we said we're going to do a simple manual tool restoration. So if anybody wants to know about power tools, let me know and we'll do a separate video on that topic. If you're going to shape and sharpen metal with hand tools, there's really no substitute for a good set of files. Particularly in the early stages where you're trying to just get your workpiece to the approximate right shape. You can get very large ones like this. They need 2 hands to operate, but you do need a clamp to hold your workpiece in place if you use files of that size. If you don't have some sort of a vise, then use smaller files where you can hold the workpiece in one hand and the file in the other. And you can even get small pocket files like this one that you can take with you out into the field for a quick touch up if you dink your edge. It's worth mentioning that files come in a variety of grades. Then like this one, they can be extremely coarse that remove a lot of metal. This one is what's called a second cut, a medium grade. And there's a smoothing file as well, which is finer still. The coarser they are, the more material they remove, but the rougher the finish they leave behind. So you generally need to work through the grades or use something else to give a nicer finish after filing. There are also diamond hones, and I have them in medium, fine and extra fine. And I'll use those after using a file to get the rough shape that I want on the bit of an axe. And you can think of them as almost sort of the medium stage of going through this. They won't give the final finish, although the extra fine will get very, very close. But once I've got a rough shape, I'll generally use diamond hones to smooth out all the file marks and any areas of imperfection. Stones are more traditional than diamonds. This is a small carborundum pocket stone. You can get large bench stones, often with both a coarse and a fine side, and those also will come in a pocket variety like this one. Again, there's a coarse side and a fine one, and that's great for slipping into a pocket and just giving the edge of your axe a touch up if you're doing a lot of work out in the field. The option I like to use to give a really good finish to a bevel is wet and dry paper. I form a sandpaper designed for metal, and it comes, as you can see, in a whole variety of grits, from 100, which is very coarse, through 400, which is smooth, to 600, even 1000, which gives a glossy mirrored finish to steel. So let's take a look at the bit of the axe and understand what we have to do here. We do have some concerns. On the left hand side, somebody's used an angle grinder, I think, possibly a coarse file, and really flattened out the bit and made a very thin, very fragile edge all the way across to the middle. The other side is worse still. They've obviously cut into something and hit something hard like a nail, and they've taken several divots out of the cutting edge, which means we're going to have to file back 2 to 3 millimeters to get a smooth edge. So we clamp up and we file, and I want you to notice up close the filing action. As well as filing left to right in a curve to maintain the curve along the cutting edge, I'm also putting pressure on the upper hand so that we're filing in a slight curve from front to back, and that creates that convex edge as well as the curved bit, so it curves left to right and front to back. This is a useful little tip. Once you've done a bit of basic filing, you're trying to find the areas where there's still damage, where there are flat spots, divots, marks in the cutting edge, and areas that still need to be convexed around. Take a Sharpie and literally colour in the whole of the bevel that you're filing. And what this is going to allow us to do, and we'll see it in action in a minute, is as we file, areas that are nicely convex, the Sharpie will come away almost straight away. But areas that are flatter, or even worse, concave, you'll be able to see as the black will stand out. So here's our coloured piece. I'm going to take the file to it now, and what you'll see is almost immediately areas of silver begin to appear. But watch that top left corner up there. Even though almost everything else is disappearing, that stays a stubborn black. And that's because there's some great divots in there. If you look at the top as well, in the centre you can see a small black mark that refuses to be filed away. And that again is another nick in the cutting edge. So the joy of having the Sharpie there is I can now see those areas, say although most of the bit is nicely convex, I need to work back another millimetre or two just to get rid of that damage. After filing away the Sharpie for the first time, you can see that we have got rid of the very pronounced damage along the edge, but there's still black marks along the centre at the edge moving across to the right, and that's areas where, although we've cut back so that the actual edge is even, the transition, the curve, is not yet as smooth as it needs to be. So we'll take the file to it for a third time. And having done that, you can see a difference. If you look along, it's nice and smooth now in the transition from left to right. It's not without its problems. There are still some rough spots. In the middle of the cheek, just here, you can see there's an area that wants smoothing out, and some areas that just need gentle transitioning on the cutting edge. To get rid of those rough spots, I'm going to use the medium diamond hone, and I'll just smooth it across towards the edge. Now look at the technique. I'm pressing on the front with my finger, and that is slightly curving the hone so that it follows the convex curve that we're trying to create rather than honing on the flat. And we just keep doing that, alternating sides, left to right, front to back, and very quickly we'll end up with something like this, and you can see the difference. We're getting a much more smooth curve to that cutting bit. It's not perfect, there's still scratch marks coming across it because we're using a relatively coarse diamond. We could go down the grades to the fine and extra fine on the diamond hones next, but I prefer at this point, if I have the choice, to switch to wet and dry paper. I just use one of these sanding blocks in order to do wet and dry work, but what I'm pointing to here is a piece of mouse mat that I've glued to the bottom. You could use leather or felt or carpet underlay, but you want something that's soft. And what that means is when you put the paper over the top, as you push it over the axe bit, it conforms to the curve. So I start with a coarse-ish paper, 240 grit, and I'm just smoothing it off towards the cutting edge. And I'll then work through the grits, 400, 600, flipping the axe over every few strokes, and we'll very soon get a lovely finish. Very quickly you can get this kind of a finish using wet and dry paper. To be honest, if you went to town with some 600 grit and 1000 grit, we could very easily polish that bevel to a mirror. But there's no need. This is a simple axe, and that edge is very much as sharp as it needs to be. How sharp? Well, if we just run it along the corner of a bit of kindling wood, you can see the little feather curls coming away from the edge of the axe. It's not as sharp as a plain iron. It's an axe, and we've sharpened it as an axe, but it's more than sharp enough. One thing that does concern me slightly with the amount of work we've had to do with files, hones and wet and dry paper is the polished area extends further back up the axe head than I would ideally want it to, because that dull grey finish we got using the vinegar, that oxide layer, protects the axe head from rust. And whilst the bit itself needs to be shiny, I don't like that much shiny metal. So I'm going to pop this axe head back in the vinegar and build that patina up again over the sides of the cheek in order to protect it long term from rust. Well, I hope Abraham Lincoln would approve. Certainly that axe is going to be fit for its purpose, and it actually is true. Spend some time servicing your tools and they'll work so much more efficiently when you come to put them to use. If this kind of content's interesting and you've enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up down below. Just take a second to do that, and maybe leave us a comment. Tell us what else you'd like to see. It makes such a difference to us when you do. Next episode, I think, will be just a short supplementary in which we show the axe head coming out of the acid dip, how I clean it up finally, and how I give it a final rust protective coating. After that, we'll get on to putting a new handle on. If you want to know when those episodes are published, click the subscribe icon and the bell next to it and you'll find out. But whatever you do, please come back and see us soon. You take care.